I'm Kuupua. I am the Nahasda Planner and Cultural Resource Specialist for DHHL. So today we're just going to talk about DHHL's internal process for historic preservation review compliance. So really just going over the federal and state regulations and then how we want DHHL to start standardizing our internal operations. Okay. So this is just a really quick overview of what we're going to talk about for the next not quite fully an hour. So we're going to start with the federal process and just very quickly going over NHPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, and one of its main features, which is Section 106. Then we're going to go over to our state process and look at Chapter 6E and how that applies for DHHL, and then walk through the whole historic preservation review process under HAR 13-275. Then we're going to discuss a little bit about HICRIS submittals, what needs to be included in those, and then our internal process for DHHL. So this is NHPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, and it came about because in 1966, Congress passed a comprehensive program for the purpose of preserving, restoring, and maintaining the historic and cultural environment of the nation. In recognition of that, there are four main features of NHPA. So it established the National Register of Historic Places, which comes into play when we have to evaluate the significance of historic properties. It creates the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, or ACHP, which really gives advice and is kind of this a hub that you can go to for any inquiries, and then they also need to have ample time to be notified for anything concerning Section 106. It also establishes the criteria and procedures for listing sites onto the National Register. And for Hawaii specifically, we do have a Hawaii Register of Historic Places that you do need to be eligible for in order to be eligible at the national level. And then lastly, and most importantly for us, or most relevant, is the Section 106 process for consultation. So this is Section 106. It applies when a federal agency funds, licenses, or approves a project that might have an effect on historic properties. And for DHHL, this really applies for NEPA as well as when we use Nahasda funds. So this really just ensures that federal agencies take into account the preservation value of historic places anytime we do development or whatnot, and to also afford the ACHP a reasonable opportunity to comment on those projects. So at the state level, what we have is Chapter 6E. And similar to how Congress created the NHPA in recognition of the importance of historic properties, the state constitution will duly recognize and values the conserving of historic and cultural properties. And the legislature did declare it as a matter of public policy to conduct activities and programs in a manner that's consistent with the preservation and enhancement of our historic and cultural properties in Hawaii. So 6E establishes the statewide historic preservation program, which is administered by SHPD, and our projects often fall under 6E8 because DHHL is explicitly called out under Provision B. So 6E provides the overview of the historic preservation program, and SHPD administers that program, and then Hawaii Administrative Rules Chapter 275 really operationalizes that and gives us the step-by-step process of how to get through the historic preservation review. So we're just gonna run through the process very quickly. This is step one, 13-275-5. So here you see that you'll need an inventory survey. Well, you'll see if SHPD requires one of you. So an inventory survey, the function of it is to identify historic properties, assess the significance of any of those historic properties, and then recommend appropriate mitigation. So it does ask very simply, and I do have examples in the back of the whole flow chart on the historic preservation review process. Is a very yes, no for each question, and then what the steps are for that. So is there a historic property in the project area? That's gonna be the first question asked of you through this rule. And if it's yes, then does an adequate inventory survey exist? And if not, is one needed? And that's something that you as the agency, so DHHL, would make the initial determination on, and then ask SHPD for a concurrence on that. SHPD will determine whether or not you need an inventory survey, or if that's not gonna be sufficient, if you need an inventory plan. And inventory surveys can include any of these three things. So an archaeological inventory survey, architectural inventory survey, or an ethnographic inventory survey. And all three will function to do those three things, which is identify the properties, assess the significance, and recommend appropriate mitigation. So while an inventory survey can be expensive, it does help because it answers questions for the first 4 steps of the process. So if you do have historic properties in your project area, then you do have to evaluate the significance. You have to do this because, like the NHPA, one of the main functions of it was creating the National Register of Historic Places. So to be eligible for that, you have to meet one of 4 different criteria. At the state level, we have 5 different criteria that you could meet. So when you do an evaluation of significance, what you see on the left is what your assessment needs to look like and include to the SHPD. And you have to determine which of these 5 criterion that your property meets if they are significant. And if they don't meet any of these, then you just have historic properties. They're not going to be significant, which doesn't elevate them to a different, doesn't make them eligible for either register. The next step is determining effects to his significant historic properties. So if you do have significant historic properties, you have to determine the effects to it and then propose mitigation. So with this, there are only 2 different categories that you would fit into. You would either have no historic properties affected, which moves you along to the next step of the process. Or if you have effects with proposed mitigation, then your effect is one of these 5. And then you have to propose mitigation to address which of these effects you have for the property. And it could be more than one. Yep. And so if you do have effects with mitigation, you have to propose mitigation. There are 5 buckets that this falls into. If you look at this rule in particular, 13-275-8, it'll give you more information on what kinds of mitigation fit within each of the 5 buckets. From there, you would have to make a detailed mitigation plan that has to be approved by SHPD. So each of the 5 categories of mitigation fit into a plan. And then there are specific qualifications that anyone working on these, your architects, your archaeologists, your ethnographers, they all have to meet the qualifications of a professional working in this field under HAR 13-281. So once you do a mitigation and have a mitigation plan, you do have to ask SHPD to verify that the plan has been successfully executed. And if so, then your preservation review process has ended. So that's the last box that you see there. To end the review process, you have to fulfill one of these 3 options. So again, if you had done the mitigation, had a detailed mitigation plan, SHPD verified the successful completion of it, your preservation process ends with that. If SHPD agreed that no historic properties will be affected at all, you essentially stopped at step 2 of this process and you would fall under the middle bucket. And then your last option is if SHPD agrees that adequate procedures have been taken, so determine that the historic properties are likely to be present, but that no historic property, or wait. Yeah, so if they've determined that no historic properties are likely to be present in the project area, then again, you wouldn't have to go through this process. So really, the last bucket is what takes you all the way through from 13-275-5 to 13-275-10. The other 2 could take you as far as 13-275-6. Again, I know this is a lot and we're going kind of fast. I do have the templates. If you're online and you want a copy of it, I can email it to you at the end. I will have my contact information up here. For those here, we have them in the back as well if you want to take a look. So now we're going to get into the HYCRIS submittals. So we've just gone over the review process, and there's a lot of different things to submit along the way. And we're all familiar with HYCRIS at this point, but this is just a precursor to discussing the internal process at DHHL that we really want to standardize. So when you're doing a HYCRIS submittal, these are 4 supplements that you really need to include in your initial submittal. So that's when you're creating your project profile on HYCRIS. These are 4 things that you would need to upload. So first is going to be the agency cover letter. That can be your 6E or 106 or your combined 106 6E request for concurrence with determination. It can be your early agency to agency letter requesting SHPD recommendation regarding the need for a survey pursuant to 13-275-5. It can be any of those. And you can have more than one, but one of them will have to come in as an agency cover letter. The others can come in as other. You need your 6E intake form. There's a link to this in our HICRIS submittal worksheet on SharePoint if you're a DHHL employee. It's also on SHPD's website. It's a fillable form. It provides a lot of the information that they ask you for in steps 1 through 4 of the historic preservation process, but they still SHPD will still ask you to do this because it's all in one place for them to look at. You would also need to include your construction plans and or your permit application, and then at least one photo of the project area, if not more. So this is gonna be an example that we look at. I do have a template for the letters that you need to submit to SHPD. This is one of them. So because we are subject to the 106 process through NAHASDA funds or NEPA, a lot of times we're gonna have to tell SHPD about our 106 consultation and also our 6E consultation. But rather than sending 2 separate letters, we do a combined letter. So these are all the things that need to be included in that letter. And I know it looks a little easy on its face, but then how do you put that into a letter? So the next slide is, this is the template. And we built templates for each letter. So when you look at this on SharePoint, you're gonna download it. Everything that's highlighted are all the areas that you need to fulfill. So you would include your project number, which is the HICRIS number. The DHHL number, there's a coding for each of the offices at DHHL. Please use yours. Planning has one, NAHASDA is really good at using a coding system for tracking projects. If you use that, it helps us internally as well to organize and find projects a lot quicker and all the materials for it. So please utilize that in your letters. And then it does become part of the record, which is also important. So all the highlights are areas that you would include for your specific project. On that side, you'll see consultation with NHOs, and it does have a 1, 2, 3. It'll be a lot more than that. I think the DOI list, there's at least 10. So if you do need any help with that, please come talk to planning. We'll have the list for you that you can identify NHOs on the DOI list and then the associations for each of the islands, depending on where your project is. So for our internal process, it's really simple. We just want to standardize 3 main things. The first of which is to route all of your HICRIS submittal letters that we discussed to planning, which really means you're routing it to me. I will be reviewing all of your letters. So we want your SHPD initiate consultation letter, so that can be your combined 106 and 6E. It could be just your 6E letter or just your 106 letter. And then also your request for SHPD concurrence with determination letter. So when we look at that, all we're doing is making sure all the relevant information is in there, making sure the information is correct. For example, if you chose effective mitigation and you chose the wrong type of mitigation, it gives us the chance to fix that at the forefront before you submit on HICRIS, because then it'll be in HICRIS for SHPD to review. They'll take however long to look at it, get back to you, either giving recommendations based on what you said or asking for clarification. And that's gonna delay us. And it's delayed us by months on certain projects. So to avoid that and minimize the back and forth, having us review it, sending it back to you, it might have substantial edits, it might not, but at the very least, it saves us a lot of time and energy at the forefront so we can get things expedited through SHPD. Anything that has to do with NAHASDA funding, we will internally reroute from planning to NAHASDA for their review and then get it back to you. Again, we have all the templates for the letters on SharePoint. So to make it easier for you and not have to start from scratch, download the templates, input your project information. It'll be a lot smoother. It'll cut your time down on working on these letters significantly. And then send it to us, we'll review, send it back to you, and then you can submit on HICRIS. If you don't want to do the HICRIS submittals, have your consultants do it. And then lastly, and very importantly, attend the DHHL and SHIPD meetings. We're very fortunate to have these quarterly meetings with SHIPD to discuss our DHHL projects, and it does help us streamline reviews, keep us on track, keep everyone accountable, and keep the projects moving forward. And if you don't show up to these meetings, especially as a project manager, we skip your project. And who hurts from that are the beneficiaries who need you to get the projects moving. So as much as we love your input leading up to the meetings, letting us know that things are accurate, giving us updates, it's really important that you are in the meeting talking to the SHIPD staff directly so that we can get more next steps from them. Oh, yep, that's all. And that's my contact information. So if you have any questions or if you want me to send you templates or the flow chart of the historic preservation review process, shoot me an email. Thank you. Are there questions?
Are there any questions in the room? I did want to add something quickly. So I talked about project descriptions in my little piece. Claudine talked about what the project scope was as well. And it also really impacts what Ku'upua is doing. So if the project scope doesn't include all of the pieces, then what ends up happening is we might get a determination from historic preservation from SHIPD, and it only covers one segment. So we have had projects where the material's gone forward and it's only been for infrastructure for a community that is going to have houses, and then each one of the families had to go back and get 6E for their house. That is really not what we want to do. It's our job as a department to help streamline the process for our beneficiaries. So while it may seem easier and quicker to just do one segment of the project, it's really important to include everything that you can. And if you're not sure, Ku'upua is an amazing resource. So talk with her and see if it makes sense to include it. Sometimes you cannot, but if we can, you know, we are so fortunate. We did not have her 6 months ago, so I'm super grateful that she is here. It takes a load off of all of us by having an expert here. So please utilize her, and if you're unsure, ask.
No. Mahalo, Malia.
Yes. Okay, wait, I apologize. I caveat that. 1A, 1B, which is now called 1A and part of 2A, that is covered and complete. But there's the greater Keokeo Waiahuli that we are just starting the ERR process for. So that other section, but all of where your lots are, that one, and this was a perfect example of one where we had to go back for every single house. And it was a struggle, but we've learned from that and we are moving forward.
Okay, seeing no questions online, I will move on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ku'upua. Okay, so